Our adjutant called us in and said that Army headquarters planned to do something about parachuting in South Africa, or to form a parachute unit in South Africa, and they wanted volunteers to go on a selection course in Voortrekker Hoogte. I was one of the volunteers and eventually landed up at the Army College in September 1960, where we underwent a 2-week selection course. And we were subjected to, I call it torture, during those 2 weeks, because of the fact that not one of the instructors that trained us at that stage had any idea what a paratrooper, how fit a paratrooper should be.
Op die ou einde daar 15 oor see gegaan. Ons het in Abingdon was die dorpie die naaste aan die Engelse valskerm skool gewees. En ons het die opleiding daar gedoen vir 3 maande. Het ons reg deur gegaan, die springkursus, die afgooi-strook kursus en dan die instrukteurskursus het ons gedoen.
The first 2 jumps we did was done from a balloon, which really scared us because you don't have the same feeling from a balloon that's static in the air compared to an aeroplane moving through the air with backwash and things like that.
Ek kan nou goed onthou sy bevel wat hy altyd gee vir die kabel om te laat loop die ballon op. Hy sê up 800 feet, 4-man jumping.
On the 1st of April, I remember April Fool's Day, 1961, the unit was founded.
Paratroopers, all courses are tough. Otherwise it's not a course. Yes, it was a tough course. It was, yeah. Physically and mentally also, you know. But I was what they call the veldkornet in those days. And Willem Lou was his lieutenant colonel or commandant. I knew Willem Lou from previously when I was in the South African Army, when I got my commission in the South African Army. As a really tough bastard. He really was a difficult old bugger. But he and I clicked, you see. So when I became the adjutant, we worked together very well. And so I decided to stay on and become a paratrooper. I didn't even know we had paratroopers.
I think the most important thing about a paratrooper is the fact that they are volunteers and they must have the will to do it.
I'm a paratrooper, I jump out of aeroplanes. So therefore, everybody who's got any woman in him wants to become a paratrooper. Now you can select people, you see, because they want to be there.
In 1968, I attended course 54V, which was the first permanent force, basic parachute course.
Even the permanent force people, you apply, then you get selected.
So I went and did my military service, which in those days was supposed to be 9 months, but I volunteered to join the paratroopers in Bloemfontein, and that was the first year where military service was 1 year for paratroopers, 9 months for everybody else.
We were the last of the 9-month boys. They said, just before that, they said to us, no, stay an extra 3 months and you'll no camps for you guys. Needless to say, a year or 2 later, we were called up again.
We had a certain military commitment that required from us a certain number of troops, and we couldn't deal with that because if you have a 1-year system, you spend at least 6 months in training. I would rather say you need 9 months in training and you only have 3 months. So when you move towards the idea of 2 years, then you can spend a whole year of training and you can have a whole year of operations, which enabled us to maintain a force in being.
In 1976, as a second lieutenant, I had the opportunity to go back to the Parachute Battalion, and I did my parachute course with a National Service Company.
I was at Tempe originally, and General Mo Ulchich, those years he was still a lieutenant. They came around to do selection, and we were 6 selected from almost 1,000 guys who went. Sergeant Major Smitty and Pip van Zyl and those guys pitched up and they showed us these parachutes. I thought, oh, that's fantastic, but you know what, I'm not going to do that. But I'd spoken my mouth away a little bit earlier and my mates said to me, no, call it. You want to be the Parabat, go and try out.
So they would pitch up at these units with these slung fell, what we used to call them, the jump jacket, and the maroon stable belt and the maroon beret with the shiny wings on the chest and these long, big red jumpers. And they would pitch up to these units, which would be very impressive to the troops to see these guys in these uniforms.
Being in Grahamstown and seeing those paratroopers that rocked up on the parade ground that day, that was it. I was super fit and I saw this and I said, that's where I want to go.
We were conscripted, we knew we had to go. We were part of cadet corps at school. I was a sergeant in the drill prestige platoon. And my brother went to one side, which is the 1st South African Infantry Battalion, and we used to go and see him off at the station. And I'd see these airborne guys walking, but they were mean guys, man. They had dark eyes and fit young men walking with attitude. And I looked and I thought, that's what the unit I'm going to go. When I go to do my 2-year service, I'm going to the Parabats.
I remember as a high school, I was a high school kid. I had hair down to here, and I was walking down the road once, and I saw the soldier walking towards me. And it was a paratrooper, skinny guy with red hair, and with his maroon beret on, and his shiny wings on his chest. He's an airborne paratrooper, and he had a no-nonsense look in his eye. He was telling me how he had jumped into a terrorist base in Angola, and he had landed in a tin roof, taken somebody out with a knife, and I thought, you know, that's where I'm heading. I want to jump into a terrorist base and land through a tin roof.
I mean, I don't know what a Parabat was, except that my uncle Brom was a Parabat. I don't know what they were doing or what their mission was, but just, you know, the rapport that these guys had, with the wings and the mott and the maroon beret, and they were Parabat, you know, and you looked at them and they thought, you know, these guys are different from the rest.
When I was around about 10 years old, I met Colonel Jan Breitenbach, and I saw him with his slangvel and red boots and beret and everything, and I asked my father what this was all about, and he explained the whole thing to me, and I said, that's what I want to be one day. I want to have that slangvel and that red beret.
I had always looked up to my father who fought in the Bush War, and the reason I wanted to go to the army was to pretty much emulate him. And what better than to become a paratrooper and wear the maroon beret?
From a young age, my dad used to show me all his photo album. He had a photo album of all his mates and jumping out of the plane. And from a young age, you're going to go to bats when you're older. You're going to go to bats when you're in the army.
Yeah, yes, Shane Warren, he had no chance. I mean, every time I sat, I told him about it, but I didn't push it. I just told him about it, but I didn't push it. But he went and surprised us.
Eventually, I got called up to one side as well, and after about 2 weeks, the paratroopers came around, and they did. They looked very glamorous and very pristine, and they did an appeal for guys to come and join the unit, and we did a few selection tests. We had to skip. Big thing is, if you can't skip, you don't jump out that aircraft. So one of the tests was skipping, push-ups, sit-ups, to come afore under a certain time.
After that, they have an interview, and a couple of questions are asked from a psychological point of view.
We were off in the train to Bloemfontein. We got to Bloemfontein, I would say about 11:30 at night. And on the station, there were these guys, everybody shouting, everybody was running. In today's terms, you would think it was a bomb explosion or something that was on the station. But eventually, they all got us into trucks, and they wheeled us off to the camp.
You had a screaming eagle, a fish eagle in a big cage at the gate as you walked in that would yelp every time that you came in, which was the emblem of the South African paratroopers. And it was a tidy base. The street names were all famous paratrooper battles: Kasinga, Vietnam, Moscow. These are all operations inside Angola. And at the time, it was fighting against SWAPO.
And I knew that this is one of the top units in the world. Driving in, and everybody was running. The only one that wasn't running was the colonel. Everybody from sergeants to lieutenants were running. Nobody was allowed to walk. That was the first thing. The second thing I saw was their hair was short. And there was a certain protocol between the juniors and the seniors. And it wasn't long before the seniors came in and gave us punches, fussbaits they called them. And invariably they wouldn't hit you that hard, but they'll just tell you to stay down. And there was always the idiot that would try and stand up and be bravado. And obviously you got smacked into oblivion, and then they started basics, and basics was hard. And after basics, a lot of guys fell off.
And we went right into the night, probably early hours of the morning with them. And on that first night, some guys already started falling off, and it's called an RTU, return to unit. And the guys that don't make it in those first few weeks are RTU'd.
I've ended up in the lines with my brother in the same bungalow, in the same platoon. On the first weekend post that I suffered a broken leg in a motorcycle accident. I couldn't do PT course, I couldn't do jump course, and it was a huge disappointment.
We get to Bloem, it's freezing. So they tear us on in front of the toilet. So Sergeant Grebe is standing there and he's like shouting at us. We're all going, why is this man shouting at us? So he says to me, 19 seconds, 90 seconds, om die pakhuis. So we think, fuck, this is easy. Because the toilets are right behind him. So we're 90 seconds around the toilets. So he says, nie die kakhuis, nie die pakhuis. So then we all standing there, this is not so tough now, is it? So,
because we were permanent force, the instructors thought us all, especially the infantry guys, to be a bit of a dreigement, a threat to their existence as instructors at this elite unit. So they really put in all effort to get rid of us as soon as possible. I qualified as a paratrooper, went back to my unit, and the next year I got a permanent transfer as an instructor at 1 Parachute Battalion.
And I've always said that to all the troops. What we're trying to teach you here is hard. What we're doing to you is hard. But you'll reap the results afterwards. You'll find out. And that is why the battalion troops excelled during most of the operations that they were in. Good discipline and good training.
There's a selection to be a paratrooper. You can't just volunteer and get your wings. So there's a 2-week, very tough, well-known selection course that the guys go through, and not everybody makes it. 100 or so, 150 guys out of maybe 500 or 600 that get through.
You start off with your first period, which is on the rugby fields. It's supposed to be a warm-up, but in that warm-up you can probably do 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups, plus a bit of buddy PT along there where you've got to carry your mate across the field in all various positions. Scarp dry and barbell dry. And that's just 2 periods of the day. It's then followed by a 14-kilometer run, which you run in a squad. And if one guy falls off the back of the squad, you've got to go pick him up, so you end up doing more than 14 Ks. And that takes up another 2 periods. Now you still got another 5 periods of PT to complete. You have the notorious marble session you've got to get through. You have pole PT and rifle PT, and then maybe every other day you might have something a bit more fun in terms of boxing. We each box each other, but that's 3 minutes, and then you get to sit off the rest of the period. And if you draw blood, you might get a couple of PT sessions, periods off, just for doing so. And then there was also toe trick, where you've got to put up a big drum and work as a team.
Every Monday and every Friday there were 6 tests that the guys had to do, and they had to pass these tests. They had to climb a rope, they had to jump a wall of 6 feet with full kit. They had to carry their buddy for 80 meters in 75 seconds. Both of them full kit and rifle. They had to do sit-ups, 67 sit-ups in 2 minutes. And they had to do what we used to call wissellope, cross runs between 2 10-meter lines. And they had to touch over the line every time. And there was a certain technique how you went over the wall. You would run up to the wall and kick with your one leg against the wall to project yourself at a different angle and land on top of the wall and then roll over. But especially on the last Friday, they had to pass all 6 these tests.
Every day running to the brug, through the damwall, dragging poles, carrying guys on poles.
And we did them in heavy battle smocks. You know, and these things got wet and it was hot and sweaty, and they'd make us roll and tumble and turn and jump off things.
End of the first week, there was an interesting thing that happened, and that's what we would call the nice surprise. The guys would get tar poles and tires, and they would go for a nice 21-kilometer run. There was one company, the company that I was part of, which Granger and John Delaney and a bunch of other guys were also part of. That specific PT course was steel pallets that they used instead of gum poles and tires.
First surprise, they say, oh, we're going to go watch movies or we're going swimming and whatever, bring your towels. So we took our towels and they gave us 250 kilogram airborne crates to carry 21 kilometers. We were the first and only company ever to do that. They stopped it immediately after that. We had so many guys falling off.
If you survive through the PD course and you don't get RTU'd, return to unit, then you'll go on to do your jump phase.
PD course was quite a leveler. You had the big strong guys that everybody thought is natural born paratroopers. They didn't make it. You had the small, wiry, skinny guys that made it. Our instructor was a guy called Wit Willem Pretorius and Jochie Gous. Now Wit Willem Pretorius and Jochie Gous had this competition between the two. They would see who could get rid of the most guys within a period.
There was one period where they did PT with a concrete block, the marble, and that was the nemesis for a lot of guys because the marble would just break a lot of guys mentally.
Willem was a ruler. He really was. Our class, I think, started with about, 45, 50 guys. And by day 3, we were down to about 30. And Sergeant Major Dubé came around and said, "You're not here to kick them off the course. You had to test how fucking strong they are." And Willem said, "Oh, but some more."
Kevin Green and I, we pushed through. I mean, we weren't the biggest guys, but when we got this marble weighs 34 kilograms. And eventually Kevin would just run at the sergeant with the with the marble and just chuck at him and he'd say, "Pick it up." And he would never kick him off. And then every morning they'd say, in roll call, "Delaney." And I'd go, "Delaney, Sergeant." And he'd say, "Are you still on my course? I'm going to get you off." And I tell him, "You'll never get me off. I'm going to be a paratrooper. I'm going to wear the wings with a maroon beret."
I personally believe it's 80% psychological and that 20% is physical. Because if you've got the endurance and the will to do it, it is possible.
My boots were too small for me when I went through the PD course. And I ripped up my feet really badly. But I didn't complain because I know that one complaint and it's over. They send you back, RTU. I remember one fella telling me once when I woke up early to bandage my toes in the morning to put it in the boots, and he was saying, "Man, when I see you," because that's when the guys quit in the morning, when you have to get out of bed. You can just quit right there. And he said, "When I see you getting up early, extra early, and stuffing your feet bandaged up in those boots," he says, "he thinks if you can do it, I can do it." So
I think the toughest thing for me was a 21k run with poles and tires. We were 4 in a pole and tire. If one fell off, the other 3 had to finish with it. So you had to make sure that whoever was in your group was going to make it. And you chose those guys wisely.
Stuff Ari that stage, yes, he drilled us like hell. We were really, really super fit.
I think if you had the nerves and the courage to report that Monday of the second week at the old hangar or in front of the instructors, and you had no injuries, you could make it. But I think on our 2 weeks PT course, we lost a lot of good guys, a lot of good paratroopers in our 2-week PT course because of the injured, and I think that's the main reason why they moved to the 3-day PT course.
I remember it was day 1. It rained the whole day. So we did the battle tests at the unit, got into the samples, and then went to the Koi Cup, where we then did the obstacle course on the Koi Cup. We had to do it 3 times and X amount of times. And that night we were supposed to do a route march. But they were worried the ground was too soft and they were going to pick up injuries. So they made us sit like prisoners of war, where we had to sit down, legs in front of us, arms behind our back, and we couldn't look left or right, and you couldn't say anything. And we sat like that for 4 or 5 hours, and just sitting there and the emotions and the thoughts that are going through your mind. And guys dropped off, and they were quite strict. And the worst thing they did was they had I think probably a 2-foot bra there, and they had boerewors and chops and walking around and says, you want to climb off, you can grab a chop and you can climb off, have a burros.
You know, to come through that PT course and to get drilled into the ground, and there's just, you come out the other side and you're standing there, and then the first question they ask you, who was the RTU? And you're saying to yourself, do I need to take all this? Do I need to sit here for another week and take all this stuff? And you think about it, and you look around you, and you look at your buddies there, and they're sweating, and they're grinding, and they're sweating blood and tears.
The moment you feel like giving in, you'll see one of your mates there, pushing on, and you say, well, if he can do it, I can do it.